You're listening to the Armchair GM Sports Network.
You're listening to the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres Edition, your source for all news, press conference reactions, analysis, and objective discussions regarding the NHL's Buffalo Sabres from right here in the Niagara region. Here are your hosts, Brandon Caputo and Austin Broad.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another installment of the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres Edition right here on the Armchair GM Sports Network, your August 5th, 2021 edition, your source North American sports coverage by sports fans, for sports fans, delivered to you right here in the beautiful Niagara region. You can find us on social media for updates, giveaways, and sponsorship promo codes by following the podcast on Twitter at Armchair GM Pod, as well as make sure you're following this show's podcast at AGM Sabres Pod. We post interactive polls on there for our shows. You can like us on Facebook and Instagram as well on social media. You can listen to us on many platforms, including Spreaker.com, the free Spreaker app, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, CastBox, and Deezer. Wherever you're getting your podcasts at, we are there for you to listen to. And now, obviously, in video form on YouTube.com. So make sure you're hitting that like button, smashing subscribe, and hitting that bell icon for all updates on videos when they are released on our YouTube channel. So make sure you're giving us some love on the video side of things. Lastly, our beautiful user-friendly website, ArmchairGMSports.com, for all things regarding the network, including articles, podcast episodes, sponsors, and contributors. Everything's on there for you guys. Please go and check that out as well. As always, I'm one of your hosts of the Sabres Edition podcast. My name is Brandon Caputo. You can follow me on Twitter right underneath there at Caputs13_AGM with the Canadian Z. And I'm always joined on the Sabres portion of the network by my good friend. He is a man of many hats. He is the one and only Austin Broad. You can follow him on Twitter at Austin_Broad. Austin, I know the draft season is a long one for you. Let our viewers again know where they can find all your great articles that you've been up to.
Yeah, so basically most of my work you can find on thechargingbuffalo.net. Obviously FC Hockey is where I do most of my scouting, and then I also do some work with Dauber Prospects. So you can find me on any one of those three, and draft season's never over because I'm already getting started on 2022.
How was this week for you guys, or this last month for you guys? I'm sure it was, it's the grind time, right? Like, you're getting the draft guides out, you're doing all the heavy lifting and that, trying to get people the information. So I'm sure the draft season is like Christmas for you guys.
Yeah, draft season's always fun. You know, we got our draft guide out for TCB the morning of the draft, so that was a little taste there. You know, FC, we were done probably a month or so ago, so it's been good. It's always fun. You know, the draft is my favorite time of year. It's my favorite thing to cover about hockey, so can't complain.
Yep, and the Sabres offseason obviously has got underway as well. We're going to get into the draftees that they took in the 2021 NHL Draft. We're going to talk about some transactions that have happened already, some trades that have happened, and trades that obviously haven't happened yet, and kind of what we're expecting from the rest of the offseason for the Buffalo Sabres here. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump into the first part of today's episode, and that was the NHL Draft that happened. And just briefly going over, before obviously Owen Power went first overall to the Sabres, we're going to get into some of the other draft picks, but just for reference of the first overall picks that have gone of recent years there, it's up on the screen for you YouTube viewers there. Alexis Lafreniere, Jack Hughes, Dahlin, Nico Hischier, Austin Matthews, Connor McDavid, Aaron Ekblad, Nathan McKinnon, Yakupov, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Taylor Hall, the last 10 years or so. Austin, just is there sort of a trend or something that you kind of have noticed from the first overall picks in the last decade or so?
No specific trend. You know what I mean? It's all of them are usually pretty good, except for out of the ones you listed, I'd say Nail Yakupov is really the only disappointment there. Nugent-Hopkins isn't, a superstar by any means, but he's a serviceable NHLer. He just signed a long-term deal with Edmonton. He can get you points. He plays good on, both ends of the ice. So when you're drafting first overall, you're getting a good player more times than not. Like, out of the ones you just listed there, we literally only had one that really flamed out, and I don't really know why Yakupov flamed out because he was a really good skilled player. Maybe it's just different circumstances could have worked out better for him. But with Owen Power, I mean, when you look at D that are drafted first overall, I mean, he doesn't exactly fit the bill because he's not, he didn't have that dynamic tape that Dahlin had, but he was the lock for the number 1 overall pick in my mind. I mean, there was a little bit of time there where I thought maybe William Eklund could push for it, but Eklund didn't even go in the top 5. So that's just goes to show you this draft was a little bit up and down. And really, aside from maybe preseason when A2 Ratty was considered first overall pick, it's been Owen Power ever since then, and it never wavered.
Yeah, and obviously the Sabres now have drafted the last 2 defensemen who have gone first overall, Dahlin in 2018 and now Owen Power in 2021. I've also got up on the screen here the former defensemen that have been taken first overall, Aaron Ekblad in 2014, and then you have to go all the way back to 2006 with Eric Johnson with the St. Louis Blues, which was kind of caught out of nowhere. He had like a really good year. He kind of came out of nowhere in his draft year to be drafted first overall, and serviceable player, but did he ever really live up to the first overall selection for St. Louis? Probably not. Went over to Colorado. So Chris Phillips back in '96, Brian Berard in '95, and Ed Jovanovski in '94. So you had 3 years in a row in the mid-'90s of defensemen being taken first overall. But Austin, we don't usually see this very often, and the Sabres have been the team to take the last 2 defensemen first overall here.
Yeah, like I said, Dahlin was a bit of a special case. You know what I mean? He was, and still probably will turn into an offensive superstar. I mean, let's face it, through his first 2 years, he was the second highest scoring teenage defenseman in the history of the game, only behind Phil Housley. He's lived up to the offensive hype. His all-around game potentially needs to be ironed out a little bit. But when you look at the other names that you mentioned there, Ekblad, Johnson, Jovanovski, like those types of guys, Owen Power kind of fits that bill. He's doesn't really do anything flashy, but he's just an all-around good player. And when you look at, there was a lot of knocks on him, obviously, because defense going first overall isn't. Those guys are all great, don't get me wrong. But the argument for not picking a defensive first overall, I understand it completely. But when you look at Owen Power, I mean, at worst, he's going to be Eric Johnson. That's at worst.
Yeah.
At best, he's going to be a solid, I hate comparing players to players, but there was a reason why he was the first overall pick, and there is reasons that people say, oh, this guy could be. Every good defenseman apparently is Victor Headman, and Victor Headman really isn't even the best defenseman in the game anymore, but there is potential for Power to be that impactful of a player.
Yeah, and Owen Power obviously being taken first overall by Buffalo. I mean, we can't really expect him to come in and be a world beater right away. I mean, he might go back to college. We don't know if he is going to go back to Michigan. That team's going to be star-studded regardless, because they had how many guys did they have taken in the top 5 or 10? It was pretty incredible that how great that program was this year, and the potential to be great next year if a lot of those guys do come back. But if you look at Owen Power, I mean, what else could the Sabres have really done in that position? I mean, I know you had said William Eklund was your favorite player in the draft going into it, but I mean, do you think that they essentially made the right choice here in the guy that the consensus pick there at first overall that, was best for the franchise at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now there's no doubt that the Sabres made the right choice with Owen Power. I mean, 5 to 10 years from now, who knows? But you don't draft. I mean, you do draft based on 5 to 10 years from now, but you also got to draft with who you think is the best prospect right now. And given, what we're expecting the Sabres roster moves to, some that have already happened, what we're expecting, the big move to come up in the future, that should be adding, high-end forward prospects into the pool. So drafting Power makes a ton of sense. I mean, they have now taken 2 left-hand shot defensemen first overall with their last 2 first overall picks. So, I mean, if you're drafting Power, expecting him to be your top pair defenseman, I mean, you already have Rasmus Dahlin there. That's probably a positive. Like you said, Power, I think, given the roster makeup, there's probably like a 95% chance that he's going back to Michigan. I think it's probably going to be good for him. Like you said, that team's going to be good. He's got the potential to still dominate offensively while working on some of those defensive areas that people think he needs to work on. Probably going to win a national championship unless something goes very wrong in Michigan next year. So, it's really a can't-lose situation. I mean, you got to be a little bit patient waiting for him. But I do think at the end of the day, yeah, he was the right choice. I mean, McTavish was an excellent choice at second overall. Third overall. Beniers was great at second overall. I mean, they could have maybe pushed for first overall, but at the end of the day, I think 9 out of 10 teams were taking Power at first overall no matter what.
Yeah, and do you think that they really had any significant offers to kind of move back, or do you think that they were kind of just not really into that scenario?
I mean, according to reports on Draft Night, Anaheim tried to move up to first overall, but I don't really see what offer they would have made that would have been significant enough. I mean, it really felt like Buffalo was dead set on Power or Eklund. I didn't think they were, I think they were dead set on Power at number 1, and they wanted to get another top 5 pick to maybe try and get Eklund, but I think the offer would have had to been pretty significant for them to pass up on Power based off of everything that we've seen, all of what the scouts talked about Power. I mean, I talked to his former GM for the Chicago Steel, Ryan Hardy, and he just said this kid's going to be an absolute superstar. So it seems like if they did want to move up, or if teams wanted to move up, the offer would have to have been pretty significant. And let's face it, the first overall pick in the NHL is almost never traded. I mean, that doesn't happen. Teams especially don't trade up anymore these days. So it would have been something, but it probably would have been a significant offer for Buffalo to seriously consider it.
Yeah, and Owen Power, obviously, he impressed this year at the World Championships as well, and playing with Michigan in the NCAA, so he's definitely on the right path there. And according to the viz that was shown up on the NHL Network when he was drafted, an all-around package, hard to beat one-on-one, can play physical and skill games. So, again, you hate the comparison and thinking about what he could be, but having him and Rasmus Dahlin as two cornerstone defensemen for your team for a long time, thinking about the possibility of that is definitely something in the right direction for the Sabres, especially as they go to a transition phase here with a high roster turnover with some of their core players. So Owen Power taken first overall by the Sabres, definitely going to be interesting to see his development here coming in the next year or so, even if he's not starting the 2021-2 season in Buffalo. But other than that, Austin, with as far as the draft goes, you obviously did your homework on a lot of these guys as far as the prospects go. Were there anybody that the Sabres picked that you were really high on, that you were kind of hoping that they would go after, or kind of hoping that they would kind of be in the mindset to take some of these types of players? They went out and got a bunch of Russians, so I mean that's definitely going against the grain of Sabres drafting in the last couple of decades here. So what else did you really like as I got the picks that the Sabres took up on the screen for the YouTube viewers?
Yeah, so actually the guy that they ended up taking with the Philadelphia pick, Isaac Rosen, was a guy that I was extremely high on. I think that was still a little bit higher than I expected him to go. I think most rankings had him anywhere from, like 16 to like 24, like that range. So 14 might have been slightly higher than I was thinking that he would go, but I was ecstatic when Buffalo drafted him. Like, he's a highly skilled guy with an NHL ready shot. He passes the puck extremely well. He's apparently been on their radar for a while when you listen to their scouting department. I was really happy to see him picked up. I mean, when I was preparing for the draft and thinking of specific draft targets, I did include a couple of Russians, but that was more, I guess, wishful thinking because they, like you said, they just don't draft Russians. But when they took Prokhor Poltapov at 33rd, I was extremely happy. He's a really solid, heavy offensive player. He's plays with a hard edge. He's got offensive ability. Again, 33, don't really know if that was where I would have taken him. But again, a guy at FC that I work with, Josh Bell, he's one of the smartest guys I've ever met. And when he said that Buffalo was doing an excellent job with their 2 picks in the second round, which was Poltapov and Kisakov, I knew I had to be happy because if Josh Bell from FC thinks that Buffalo's doing a good job, Buffalo's doing a good job. I mean, their first 4 picks in the draft all have extremely high upside. And do they have bust potential? Maybe. But they have extremely high upside to be impact NHL players, and that's just a complete different strategy that we're not used to Buffalo doing. We're used to Buffalo taking lower ceiling, higher floor guys that won't really bust out but might not turn into anything special. No disrespect to, Matthias Samuelsson, Ryan Johnson, but those guys you're not expecting to be NHL stars. You're just expecting to be NHLers. This year, it seemed that Buffalo pretty much threw that to the wind and said, we're going to take swings on guys that if they work out, they're going to be impact players for us for a long time. And, the first 4 picks identify that. They're their third round picks, Josh Bloom, who doesn't have any tape from his draft year because Saginaw didn't play in the OHL. Sardarian from Russia, never even had him on my radar. He wasn't even in our top 300 at FC, but Buffalo took a swing on him in the 80s, and he's coming over to the USHL next year. He's committed to the NCAA for the year after that. A lot of skill in that guy. Olivier Nadeau from the fourth round. He was a guy that me and Curtis at TCB were extremely ecstatic about. Another high ceiling playmaking forward. Like, they completely switched their draft strategy this year, and it was a sight. Like, I was super happy about it. It's just not something that I expect because it's not what I'm used to seeing from the Sabres at all.
Yeah, I mean, taking the Russians, I mean, we know what they don't usually do with that, but you got to give them credit for trying to think outside the box and going with something different. Obviously, the last decade or so, that the drafting has not been there. They've had so many draft picks, and they haven't hit on a lot of these players, and you can see, like, taking guys in the second, third, fourth round that could possibly become impact NHL players. But it's nice to see that they're not ruling that portion out of it anymore like they had been in previous years, where they wouldn't even dare to look at certain leagues or certain countries for drafting players. And here they take 4 Russians, which, when was the last time you could say the Sabres took 4 Russians in general in maybe 5 or 10 years, let alone in the same draft? So the other thing that sticks out to me is a bunch of wingers. I mean, a ton of wingers that they took in this draft. Do you think that was an area that they just really were seeking after, was trying to get more winger depth on this organization? Or do you think that was just more of the guys that they wanted falling to them at that point, and the best player that they thought was available just happened to be wingers more times than not?
I mean, yeah, everyone says you always go best player available in the NHL. I mean, I firmly believe that too. I mean, if you're drafting for need in the NHL, you're really not drafting the right way in my mind. But I mean, it's probably a little bit of both. When you get into the later rounds, you're probably just straight up looking at highest ceiling, and they felt that the wingers had the higher ceilings. We'll see what happens with Jack Eichel, but when you look at the Sabres organization, I mean, their wingers have really not been all that great. I mean, Olofsson's a great power play specialist. We know that. Skinner had that one great year, but he struggled. Oposo hasn't really done anything. So when you look at some of their top offensive prospects now, you're looking at the guys like Jack Quinn, JJ Peterka. Now you got Isaac Rosen. Now you got, Prokhor Poltapov. You got Alexander Kisakov. These are all wingers coming up. So when you look at what they're trying to do here, it just seems like they're firmly going to believe in, Dylan Cousins being their guy going forward, Casey Middlestat being their guy going forward. We'll see what they bring in with the Jack Eichel trade, but they're going to rely on their centers to drive play, and then have their wingers just be those highly skilled guys who finish off plays, and hopefully they hit. I mean, they had 11 picks this year. If they can hit on 3 or 4 of them, that's a huge win for Buffalo. And based off their class, I think there's a better chance than not that at least 3 of those guys become meaningful NHL players.
And that's going to be the depth of your organization that the Sabres have lacked for so many years, is that competitiveness up and down your organization, and having those guys that you can develop. We know about the top players, but you have to develop those bottom 6 forwards, those second or third pair defensemen, those backup goaltenders. They just haven't had that depth in the organization in the last 10 years to be able to push everybody up. And they've kind of had to rely on guys and put them in roles where probably they were not ready, or their just skill set wasn't prepared for those types of roles. So I think that the organization starting to fill out here is a good thing. The last thing I'll mention, you said 11 picks, not one of them was a goaltender. Are you worried about that? Obviously, we're going to talk about the trade that they had made to acquire another goaltender, but with the goaltending depth with Portillo, UPL, and now Devin Levi, are you happy or are you content of them not taking a goaltender here with one of these 11 picks?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at now with the acquisition of Devin Levi, which we'll get into further, they have 3 pretty decent goalie prospects. I mean, I'm a little bit higher on Portillo than I am on Levi and UPL, but they got 3 that they're counting on. I mean, odds are one of them is going to be something. They got the next couple of years to figure that out based off the way the organization's going. And if it looks like a year from now that they need to add again, I'm sure they will add again. So no, there was a couple of goalies outside of obviously the big 2 that were, Sebastian Casa and Jesper Wallstedt. There were some goalies that I was looking at that maybe Buffalo could have taken a swing on, but I wasn't counting on the acquisition of Devin Levi. So I guess in my mind that kind of offsets it. We'll see if that was the right move. But as of right now, no, when you're banking on 3 different goalie prospects, you're in pretty good shape. I mean, Carolina took 3 goalies in this year's draft. I mean, every team approaches it differently, and with Buffalo right now, they got their 3 guys, and they felt that they needed to address other areas, and that the talent at the end of the draft for goalies just wasn't there, so they took swings in other directions.
Yep, and you got to give them credit there. They definitely went outside the box as opposed to previous regimes and previous drafts that we've seen the Sabres have. It was quite refreshing in my mind. I don't know about you, Austin, but it was nice to see them kind of, try something different here. Obviously, it hasn't worked for the last decade, the longest streak of not making the playoffs in the NHL, so they kind of had to start thinking differently and try. It's not easy to remold already molded minds, but it seems like this new regime now with Kevin Adams and being able to bring in some of his own guys to kind of help out with the scouting and things like that, with Jason Carmanos as well. I think that was a positive, and it definitely showed in this draft in their kind of first year as a full regime here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's even a different regime than Adams had last year at the draft. I mean, they have a new director of scouting. They brought in Sam Ventura to help with player evaluation. I don't know how much say he had in the draft, but he definitely made an impact in their offseason approach with their free agent signings, you could tell. So, yeah, it is interesting. I like the approach that they took. Like you said, it's a nice change of pace. They took some swings. We'll see if they work out, but I'd rather go down swinging than, be conservative. So we'll see if it works out, but all in all, pretty happy with how their draft went. Absolutely.
Yep. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a commercial break on the show today. We're going to come back and discuss the trades that had happened for the Sabres, kind of pre-draft that kind of led to a couple of them acquiring a few more assets for the draft and in prospects as well. We're going to get into our thoughts on the Jack Eichel situation and the cap-friendly situation and kind of where the Sabres are looking after a couple of these transactions that they have made in the start of free agency. So stay right here. We'll be right back on the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres edition and right here on the Armchair GM Sports Network. Carmine's Pizzeria Italiano, serving traditional-style Italian pizzas made with the freshest, top-quality ingredients. Loaded subs and their famous chicken wings. Winners of the Reader's Choice Diamond Award, 4 years running from Niagara this week for Best Pizza and Wings in Niagara Falls. Home of the best tray and wing combo in town for the price and quality. Open daily from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m., located on the corner of Drummond Road and Dunn Street. Available for call-ahead pickup or delivery at 905-374-4400. Make sure to like them on Facebook and view their website for their menu at carmine'spizzeria.ca. Carmine's Pizzeria Italiano, way too good. As we all adjust to this new world that we're living in today, masks are now mandatory, and Niagara's own Custom PPE is Canada's leading face mask provider. Visit them online at customppe.ca and choose between several mask options with different colors and sizes. Add your organization, company, or team logo so you make your face masks unique. Available to purchase online 24/7 at customppe.ca and shipped within 1 week. They have the best prices and quickest turnaround in Canada, and no order is too big or too small. Also offering custom floor stickers as well as face and counter shields for your business or workplace. Visit customppe.ca and use the code ARMCHAIR at checkout for 20% off your custom or blank face mask today. Custom PPE, Canada's leading face mask provider. Attention job seekers, if you are currently looking for work in the Niagara region, you owe it to yourself to check out the services provided by the Niagara Employment Help Center, located at 6100 Thoroldstone Road, Niagara Falls, directly across from the Camisos Plaza. Their free services include resume and cover letter writing, community resource and referral information, local labor market information, job search strategies, assistance with clarifying employment training and career goals, employment counseling and job search support, second career information and registration assistance, and all their services are currently provided by appointment only. So give them a call at 905-358-0021 or visit their website at ehc.on.ca, the Niagara Employment Help Center. This Employment Ontario program is funded by the Government of Ontario.
You're listening to the Armchair GM Sports Network, the Niagara region's best local source for North American sports podcasting coverage. By sports fans, for sports fans.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to segment 2 of today's Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres edition, right here in the Armchair GM Sports Network. Brandon Caputo and Austin Broad back with you here. Make sure you're hitting that subscribe button, hitting that bell icon, and liking us on the YouTube version for all updates regarding any new videos that are released on our YouTube channel. Hopefully you're enjoying the new video versions of the podcast. So with that said, Austin, let's talk about we talked about the draft. Let's talk about the other stuff other than the draft. We had the 2 trades to discuss. We have some off-season moves and a move that's still waiting to happen, and it might be a while. So let's firstly get into the Rasmus Ristolainen trade that caught everybody off guard on draft day. And wow, was this a shocker? Not for the fact that Ristolainen was traded, but for the fact that what the Philadelphia Flyers gave up for Rasmus Ristolainen. Austin, could you have envisioned any better of a return for Ristolainen? They used that for they got the 14th overall pick in the draft, and obviously used that in the 2021 draft. They get a second in 2023 and Robert Hagg as a defenseman, as a contract that was thrown back, who he's a serviceable guy. I mean, he's a physical, 6 kind of defenseman, so at least the Sabres can, get something out of him, hopefully. But regardless, a first-round pick, a mid-first-round pick that they used, and then a second-round pick for Ristolainen. I don't think anybody could have asked for any better than that return for him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, when you look at Robert Hagg, he's basically a cheaper left-handed version of Ristolainen, maybe without the offensive ability. I mean, he's, like you said, he's serviceable is probably the best way to describe him, but he was really nothing. The important part of this was the first-round pick that they used for Isaac Rosen, and then a second-round pick in 2023, which the next 2 drafts are completely loaded, so the more picks you have in the first 2 rounds of the upcoming drafts, the better. The fact that they got a first-round pick for Ristolainen still at this point in his career, I was a little bit shocked. I mean, they actually had teams bidding against him. I mean, Ristolainen was almost, dealt to Montreal, but Montreal's first-round pick was obviously not as high as Philadelphia. So the fact that multiple teams were willing to give up a first-round pick for Ristolainen was obviously a huge win. You clear off some cap space. You open up a spot for a younger guy to come in and potentially get a role. It was a great trade. I mean, Kevin Adams is, say what you want, whatever you think about his trades, he sets a price and he asks for certain things before he makes a trade, and he gets it. He wanted a first-round pick and a player for Ristolainen. He got it. We'll get into the Levi trade later, but he wanted a first-round pick and a prospect for Reinhart. He got it. So he holds strong, and whether you agree with him or not, he ends up usually getting pretty much what he asked for. And that Ristolainen trade was, I mean, a home run might be putting it lightly, depending on your opinion of Ristolainen, but it was a home run.
It was a grand slam, I would say, yeah. Because do you think that this trade was more the fact that Philadelphia, we saw what Chuck Fletcher had been doing, obviously trading away Shane Gostisbehere to Arizona to clear up cap space. They got Ryan Ellis from the Nashville Predators as well. Do you think it was more desperation on Philadelphia's part, making those few moves for Ristolainen, Ellis trading out some salary, the Voracek move as well, kind of trying to shake them up? Or do you think it might have been to the fact that you saw what Montreal did in the playoffs and making it all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals with a lot of bruising defensemen? Then do you think that kind of elevated Ristolainen's trade value this offseason, because we saw that, maybe these types of defensemen are valued around the league more than ever, just seeing, the 2 teams that were in the Stanley Cup Finals in Tampa Bay and Montreal have plenty of them?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it would be desperation on Philadelphia's part. I mean, when you look at Ristolainen's play style, he fits Philadelphia really well. Like, we know Philadelphia is that type of team. And then when you look at the fact teams like Montreal, Winnipeg were willing to give up first-round picks to get him, Philadelphia's need probably did increase, so maybe a little bit of desperation. But I think Philadelphia was always a team interested in him. Just he matches their city and playing style so much that when it came down to it, Fletcher wanted to make sure they got him. So they went and they offered him a top 15 pick, which I never would have expected for Rasmus Ristolainen. So thank God teams were still interested, and thank God NHL GM still value what he does despite having absolutely terrible on ice impacts. And it was, hopefully to him. I love Ristolainen. I've always loved him as a player. I have his jersey. He wasn't good, but he was always honest. He always, tried his best. He always put 100% effort into everything. He loved the city of Buffalo. He never had anything bad to say. He didn't even say anything bad when they left. He acknowledged that he was likely part of the problem. So I wish him nothing but the best, but he gave us a hell of a parting gift by getting us a first-round pick and a second-round pick 2 years from now.
Yeah, I think Ristolainen's legacy will always be very honest player, very hard-nosed player, and a guy that just wasn't around a lot of good players to be able to kind of make that core successful. Just never got the offensive side of his game up to par and what we had expected. But I think he was a very serviceable player that just happened to land on an organization in a very bad time. And I think, if the Sabres would have been a playoff team, he might have been looked at a little bit differently, and maybe those stats would have been a little bit better if he wasn't on 4 teams that had tanked during his tenure as a Sabre. So unfortunately, he didn't do any winning here and has a huge minus if you really look into the plus-minus stuff. But it just seems like wrong place, wrong time for Rasmus Ristolainen. Just never really seemed to work out in Buffalo while he was here.
Yeah, and like I said, he's a great guy. He was honest. He never said anything bad, but I don't really expect to see a whole lot of improvement for him in Philadelphia. I mean, he's a power play guy who can get you points. He's makes mistakes with the puck. He overthinks things. His defensive game, despite being physical, his defensive game isn't exactly the greatest. So, I mean, I wish him nothing but the best in Philadelphia, but if the people out there are saying, Ristolainen was bad because he was in Buffalo, you got to take a better look at his game, because he was partially bad because he was in Buffalo, but Buffalo was also bad partially because of Ristolainen.
Mm-hmm.
So
it goes both ways there.
Yeah, it was both ways there. And, even before in Finland, before he was drafted, Ristolainen's teams were never really that good. Again, is it 100% his fault? No, but you got to beware with him. He's going to make mistakes that make you crazy. He's going to have negative impacts on the game for you, but he is a guy that will come out there and, be a pain in the butt. He'll try his best and he'll always be honest. So it was time to move on. I think that's going to be the biggest addition by subtraction for Buffalo, because now you can open up the right side of your defense core. You got obviously we have a ton of money to spend, and you replace him with a guy that we'll get into it later, but Mark Pisic's probably an upgrade over Ristolainen, and you're only paying Pissic $900,000. So I mean, it was a move that had to be made. It was probably a year or two too late, but thankfully Adams finally got it done.
Yep. So we'll see what he does in Philadelphia. Hopefully he can finally make the playoffs for one of his teams that he has yet to do, it seems like, in his whole hockey career. So we'll move on here to the second trade that happened, and obviously this one was to be expected as well, with Sam Reinhart being moved, obviously the former second overall pick by the Sabres in 2014. And now the Florida Panthers hold the first, second, and fourth overall picks from that draft, and Sam Bennett, Reinhart, and Aaron Ekblad, which is very interesting to say the least about that draft. But they get the first round pick in 2022 that I believe is lottery protected from the Panthers. And then goaltender Devin Levi, who, if you have followed the Team Canada World Juniors last year, he kind of took the reins and led them to that gold medal game, and before the disappointing end against the Americans. But definitely a guy that kind of caught the league by storm as of last year's World Juniors. And I think that this was more, I think Devin Levi is a solid prospect, but when you're the Florida Panthers and you have Spencer Knight, who's ready to come up as their number one goaltender prospect, and most teams would consider Devin Levi a number one goaltender prospect if, they didn't have the luxury of having a guy like Spencer Knight. So I think the Sabres kind of looked out here that the Florida Panthers are willing to move a guy like this because of Spencer Knight, and maybe the Panthers kind of looked into this by him having such a great World Juniors. They were able to get a player of Sam Reinhart's caliber for a goaltender that they really hadn't expected much of maybe before he took the tournament by storm. Yeah,
Levi is basically a totally unknown. I mean, his sample size is 1 year in the CCHL, which he had great numbers in, but let's face it, it's Tier 2 Junior A. His first year with Northeastern was obviously wiped out because they didn't play. The NCAA played, but Northeastern was not a team that played. He had a great World Junior tournament. Like you said, he took that tournament by storm. His numbers were through the roof. This trade was, again, like I said, Adams wanted a first-round pick and a prospect. He got a first-round pick and a prospect. I think I was always of the opinion where I didn't want a goalie to be the main piece of a Sam Reinhart trade, and depending on how you look at this trade, the first-round pick could be the main piece. But really, the goalie prospect is the main piece. So on that end, I'm not super thrilled with it. But on the other end, it's kind of, when you think about Levi and his potential upside, obviously you've got to be happy with that. So we'll see how it works out. I mean, I probably would have felt a little bit better if it was like a first-round pick and a guy like Owen Tippett or, Heponiemi, like a forward prospect. But at the same time, you're not going to complain. You have another first-round pick in a loaded 2022 class. I know it's top 10 protected, but let's face it, without Sam Reinhart, Florida's pick's probably not a top 10. You then add Sam Reinhart into the mix to that forward group. I would be extremely shocked if this pick is a top 10 pick and Buffalo has to defer to 2023. So all in all, the trade on itself, in my opinion, is average. But when you look at what Adams wanted and what he said he wanted to get, he ended up getting it. So it's hard to complain. It's just my own personal belief that goalie prospects are so hard to judge, and trading away a top 6 forward for a goalie prospect just wouldn't be an approach I would take. But at the end of the day, it's really not the end of the world.
Yeah, with adding a guy like Sam Reinhart, I think Florida definitely will probably be a pick in the mid-20s, you would think, with the way that their roster is looking for next year as a strong contender to take down the Tampa Bay Lightning down there in Florida. So we'll see what they can do. But the Sabres get rid of Reinhart, they get rid of Ristolainen here. So it's interesting that they were able to move 2 of the 3 guys that they had discussed. The biggest fish is still available here in Jack Eichel. But finishing off with the Reinhart trade, would you have been happier if they would have, maybe gotten one of Florida's top prospects as opposed to that first-round pick? Or do you think that they did the best job that they could, considering that teams knew that they had to move on from Sam Reinhart and that the offers maybe just weren't there, and the market for a guy like Reinhart just for some reason wasn't as high as we saw what the return was for Rasmus Ristolainen?
I mean, yeah, the forward market wasn't the greatest. I mean, look what New York got for Pavel Buchnevich, right? They got Sammy Blais in a 2nd-round pick. And Buchnevich and Reinhart have the exact same points per game throughout their entire career. So the market for forwards just really wasn't really existent. Would I have been happier if they got a prospect instead of a first-round pick? I mean, no, I like that first-round pick. That's valuable. It's what Buffalo's going after. Next year's draft is loaded in the first round. I would have been happier if they got, like I said, a guy like Owen Tippett or Alexi Heponiemi instead of Devin Levi. But at the same time, I mean, we don't really know how those negotiations went down. We don't know if Buffalo was just hell-bent on getting Levi or what their approach to that was. But if you look at this and you end up getting Levi and a guy like Owen Tippett, I don't know if I like that trade nearly as much. And it's just the perception of what a first-round pick brings and just how strong next year's draft really is that I think the first-round pick was necessary. The prospect was a little bit extra, and, well, it stinks for me that it was goalie just because goalie, like I said, I hate trying to evaluate goalies. They're impossible to evaluate because they could be terrible for 2 years and then amazing the next year. So they did okay with that trade. I'm glad. The first round pick to me was absolutely necessary, and then the prospect was kind of bonus, whatever you want to say. So the first round pick to me was the key there.
And before we move on, I know you were really high on Anton Lundell going into the last year's draft. Do you think there was any sort of way that Florida would have ever considered giving Anton Lundell up in a trade for Sam Reinhart?
So, no. I mean, Anton Lundell is... I don't even think they would have considered giving up Anton Lundell in a Jack Eichel trade. I'll put it that way. That's how highly they view Anton Lundell. That's how much potential this kid has. I mean, who the heck knows? But if Buffalo would have found a way to get Anton Lundell in a Sam Reinhart trade, I mean, Kevin Adams would have been an absolute genius. I mean, did I think for a couple seconds that maybe the trade could have been bigger and it was more than Reinhart going to Florida and they were trying to pull Lundell away? I let myself think that for a little bit, but then, reality kind of set in, and I kind of realized that there's no way they're getting rid of Lundell. I mean, as good as Barkov is, Lundell is a number one center in the NHL at his peak. So Florida is set up really well, and they're obviously in win now mode, and they also want to be set up for the future. And when you look at what they were able to do with that Reinhart trade, they didn't mortgage the future, and they set themselves up for win now mode. So it's a decent trade for both sides. I like Florida's end of it a little bit better, obviously, but at the end of the day, Buffalo gets another first-round pick. They get another player in this organization, and they're signaling the start of a new beginning.
Yep, and not losing a guy for nothing, obviously, with his contract situation, and a guy that everybody knew that didn't want to be there anymore. So the cap space is going to be valuable for this team. So let's quickly look at that as far as the cap friendly stuff for the Sabres and kind of where they're shaking out there. Have it up on the screen for you there. And I also got to pull up the recent transactions that the team did. So there's a couple of them that have been receiving some scrutiny here, Austin. I'll just kind of list them off here, and you can kind of just give me your thoughts, general thoughts on ones you want to cover here. They re-signed Drake Caggiula after picking him up off of waivers last year. The trade for Will Butcher, which was mostly, I think, a dump for the Devils because of the additions that they had made to their decor. They brought back Brandon Davidson. They signed Vinny Hinostroza, kind of the journeyman forward, mostly known for the Chicago Blackhawks. Mark Pysyk, the former first-round pick of the Sabres, finds his way back to Buffalo, like you mentioned, on a one-year $900,000 contract. So that was nice to see Mark Pysyk coming back. And then, obviously, the two goaltenders that they had signed in Craig Anderson and Aaron Dell, those moves were very much scrutinized as far as with Linus Ullmark signing with Boston. They didn't really have any other NHL-level goaltenders currently on the roster. They've got some prospects in the pipeline, but it just seemed like, maybe there has to be another move coming from that because you would not expect Aaron Dell and Craig Anderson to be your number 1 and 2 goaltenders to start the year, would you?
No, and I mean, something interesting about the Aaron Dell signing was, Rochester tweeted out, "Welcome Aaron Dell." So I think, if anything, you're going to see Craig Anderson, and Friedman kind of touched on it on 31 Thoughts, his podcast. It kind of sounds like they're going to give UPL every chance to come in and win a job in camp. And if he does, they're going to use Craig Anderson as the mentor. And then Dell can kind of be the up and down guy where if UPL is struggling and they need to send him down, they got Dell waiting in the wings. Or if, UPL doesn't win the job immediately out of camp, they have Dell and Craig Anderson to kind of split the duties, or maybe another move's coming. But based off of all the moves that were made, it kind of seems like they're shaping up to let Luukkonen, get a run at winning the job and showing what he can do for the next year. Because let's face it, Buffalo's going young, and if they're going young everywhere, that means, there's the potential to go young in net. And if Luukkonen comes to camp and blows him away, it's not the worst thing in the world to have a guy like Craig Anderson be there to kind of mentor him and take the pressure off him every once in a while, because Anderson obviously was close to retiring, and the idea of coming into Buffalo and being a mentor to a young guy like Luukkonen is what appealed to him and why he signed in Buffalo. So I got to think that there's a legitimate chance that is what happens.
Are you disappointed that they really, with the goaltender market and a couple of the trades that were made as well, do you think that the Sabres should have been in on any of those trades for guys, like Darcy Kemper, or the ones that have yet to happen, like an Alexander Gorgiev or one of the Columbus goaltenders? Do you expect them to make a move like that, or do you think that this is probably going to be what we're going to see going into training camp?
I mean, it's possible they make another move, but I think the Columbus Blue Jackets goalies are overrated. Georgiev is probably pretty solid, but what's the cost going to be to get him? The only trade that I really thought that they could have been in on was when Boston sent Dan Vladesh to Calgary. That would have been a nice little move to try and go at. But at the end of the day, no, the goalie market was – the Darcy Kemper trade was insanity. To give up what Colorado gave up to get Kemper, I think, is absolutely ludicrous. And if Buffalo would have tried to do that, then they should be even more ridiculed. I mean, it is what it is. Goalies are – I mean, in an ideal world, no, you don't want your two goalies on your NHL roster to be making below $1 million. But at the end of the day, am I willing to give up significant assets to get a stopgap goalie? No, not even close. So while I was a little bit antsy about their goaltending situation, seeing what Kemper, was traded for, seeing what Grubauer got, seeing – no disrespect to Linus Ullmark, but Ullmark's contract was – if Buffalo would have signed to that, I would have been like, yeah, good, Ullmark's back, but would have felt that it was a tad of an overpayment. So I'm glad that they held strong with their prices that they were willing to pay. It didn't budge. It sucks to see Ullmark go, but at the end of the day, did he fit the timeline? Not really. We know Buffalo's going young. Would give Ullmark every chance he can to go be a number 1 in Boston and see how it works out? I mean, we love Ullmark. We know how good he is. I don't think it would have made sense to offer him that much money right now, given the state of the team. So I think they're going to try and go young, and if they make a move, they make a move. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to complain about their goalie situation when we don't really expect the team to be playoff team next year.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Carter Hutton, the former Sabres goaltender, seems like the only guy standing there in Arizona right now. And like you mentioned, just a couple of the trades just didn't really make sense for the Sabres' perspective if they were to go out and get one of those guys. And speaking of the New York Rangers and overpayment, I mean, we can quickly touch on this as well, the Jack Eichel situation and what is going on with, your franchise player, your captain. He has not been traded as of yet. He's kind of the last guy standing here. And it looks like the New York Rangers, maybe, as reports have come out, that they have kind of circled back around and kind of trying to up their offer a little bit, because we've talked about in this podcast before that their offers have, quite frankly, been nothing short of embarrassing as far as what they've been offering up for a guy of Jack Eichel's caliber, just not really up to snuff. So do you think that we know the Rangers have the assets to do it, but do you think that if they're willing to come around on a Capo Caco and make a few other prospects available and or a first-round pick in that scenario, that the Sabres would eventually trade Jack Eichel to the New York Rangers, even if they don't want to keep him in the Eastern Conference at this point?
Of course, there's a possibility. If New York comes forward with the best offer, then you obviously take the best offer you can get. Like we said, we don't really know what the offers have been, but we do know that everything that has been reported is that Buffalo and New York have not been close. Everything that Buffalo has said they've wanted, New York says they will not offer, and everything that New York has said that they would offer, Buffalo has said they don't want. We'll see what happens. I mean, I do think there are other teams. I think it was a little bit interesting that Anaheim was rather quiet on the first day of free agency, and so was Buffalo. Joe Yerdon kind of pointed it out. Wasn't really speculating on anything, but when you do really look at it, Anaheim was one of the teams linked to Buffalo, and they didn't really do anything of significance thus far. Does that mean they're gearing up for a significant run at Jack Eichel? It's very possible. The Montreal Canadiens were talked about as a team potential for Jack Eichel. Again, would they move the pieces that it would take to get him? I'm not too sure, but Montreal does have the pieces that could entice the Sabres to get a Jack Eichel. So there's a lot of teams still in it. Eichel's whole agent situation is what it is. To me, that if you're a Buffalo Sabres fan, that situation really doesn't do anything because it doesn't add any new news to the situation. We know that Buffalo has said you are not getting the disc replacement. Our team doctors don't recommend it. They recommend a different path. We know that Eichel wants the disc replacement. That's not news to Sabres fans. So apparently, I don't know why it was this big bombshell to the rest of the world, but Jack Eichel's leverage is I want the artificial disc surgery. The Sabres won't let me get it. That's his way out of here. I do think that another team will let Eichel get it. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. But at the end of the day, we know this relationship is over. So I don't think it would make any difference if Buffalo came out today and said, yeah, Eichel, you can get the disc replacement. It wouldn't make any difference. Eichel would still want to get traded. Eichel would still not be a Sabre next year. So rather than, do that, because people say, why aren't they doing it? Because why would Buffalo do it? Trade Eichel. His agent said he's going to be healthy if he gets that surgery. He'll be ready to go by October. So the other teams kind of know now, if I trade for him in the next week or two, he's still going to be healthy once he has that surgery. It's a situation that's been drawn out long enough. It's probably going to be drawn out even longer. But until it happens, we're just kind of stuck here, and we'll see if any more news drops that people decide to overreact to, because it's basically what happened when Eichel agents released a statement on a Friday night at 9:45.
Do you think that there was something to that, of them releasing it at that time?
I don't know. It was really weird that they released it on a Friday night at 9:45. Usually that kind of news dump, you would think if it would be in the middle of a day on a weekend or something like that. But like I said, for people who are in Buffalo and know the Sabres organization, are kind of familiar with what's been happening since Eichel's exit interview, we know that Eichel wants this disc replacement. We know the Sabres team doctors and an independent doctor didn't recommend it. So we know the situation. Eichel's agent's statements were supposed to put pressure on Adams, but I don't really know why it does, because all Adams said was right now Eichel's under contract with us, so we have the control. Yeah, Adams does have the control over Eichel right now. I don't know if Adams has control over other teams in the trade market, but Adams controls Eichel. Adams is not going to let Eichel push him around and rush a trade just so Eichel can be happy. Why would he? He wouldn't be doing his job as a GM if, he's like, oh, I'm sorry, Jack, you want to get traded? I'll trade you right now. So at the end of the day, like I said, this was more of an empty statement meant to stir up the media, and it did exactly that. But here we are, 4 days later, and there's still no Eichel trade. So did Eichel's statement really do anything? No.
Yeah, so before we wrap up today's show, Austin, I mean, I've got Cap Friendly up here for the Sabres, and kind of after the moves that they've made in the offseason, which there weren't really any significant ones as far as the free agent signings go, but they've left themselves almost $29 million in cap space. And again, with Jack Eichel's $10 million as well, that could be significant as well as to what they could possibly get back if they have to take on some salary back from another team, because nobody really has the money right now to take on a $10 million contract without giving up a lot, at least not the teams that are reportedly in contention. So what are we thinking here with the $28 million in cap space? Do you think that they're going to be making any more significant moves other than the Jack Eichel trade? Maybe they pick up some dead money that a team wants to get rid of from somebody else on long-term IR. Do you think that there's some avenues that Kevin Adams is exploring to kind of take on some money and to pick up some good players or assets in that regard? I'm looking at Dallas with their goaltending situation. They've got about 4 goaltenders now on the roster. When you look at Ottinger, Bishop, who's going to long-term IR, you have Kudobin, and then they just signed Braden Holtby. So do you think that there's a situation there where they kind of take on a guy like a goaltender that somebody might want to get rid of that's making a lot of money, or just any player in general? Do you think that there's any validity behind any of those kind of ideas for Buffalo at this point, or do you think that they're going to go into the season with a lot of this cap space and they view that as an asset?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there is. I mean, we kind of saw it with Butcher. They're willing to take on players that have value for, if they're a contract dump. But Adams kind of said he's not really thinking of the short term. He's thinking of the long term. And when you look at the Sabres cap situation, I mean, we'll exclude Jack Eichel because it's kind of widely assumed that he's not going to be on this team. As of right now, so obviously I'm going to assume that Dahlin and Yoki Haru are going to get, some term on their contracts. I think that's where a lot of the money is going to come from. They're going to spend it on Dahlin and Yoki Haru, and we'll see what Middlestat gets. But as of right now, excluding Dahlin, Yoki Haru, and Eichel, Buffalo has one player with a contract that runs past the 22-23 season, and that's Jeff Skinner. So this team is going to look a lot different in 2 to 3 years from now. They have a lot of money to work with, and Adams made it clear that that is what he is gearing up for. He's not gearing up for, the short term next year. He's gearing up for the long-term future, and having only $9 million on your cap for 23-24 is significant. It gives him a lot of ability to maneuver around, and depending on what contracts they'll have to give up to certain players, we'll see what the team's looking like in a few years, but they're going to have a lot of room to work with in the future, and, I'm sure they're going to have to take back a contract in the Jack Eichel trade solely because Buffalo still needs to get to the cap floor. I mean, right now they're nine-ish million below the cap floor, assuming that gets eaten up by Dahlin, Middlestat, and Yoki Haru. But then you're trading Jack Eichel. You have to get some money back to make that trade work. It's weird. We talk about teams that don't really have the cap space to make an Eichel trade work. Anaheim's got $19 million in cap space right now. So Anaheim could take Jack Eichel's full contract without giving up anything in terms of dead money, but that wouldn't work for Buffalo. So again, that's just another thing why I think that team makes a lot of sense. But the Sabres cap situation is setting up perfectly. I mean, the Jeff Skinner contract, it is what it is. But right now, that's the only contract on the books for 23-24 and beyond. So their cap situation, Adams has done a decent job of cleaning it up. I assume he's going to commit of some money in term to Dahlin and a decent amount of money to Yoki Haru. But all in all, I mean, I hate to compare it, but he's done a lot better. Botterill was considered a cap genius, and it looks like Adams has done a decent job of cleaning up the cap genius's mess, realistically.
Yeah, there's going to be, like you mentioned, looks like a big roster turnover in the next couple of years, possibly for Buffalo, with all these guys coming off the books and new prospects wanting to find their way up into the main roster there. So it'll be really interesting to see what they go through in the next couple of years. And Kevin Adams is certainly on his way with all this extra cap space. So before we wrap up today, Austin, by the next time we record an episode here, what are you hoping that the Sabres have done? Obviously, getting Dahlin and Yoki Haru signed as restricted free agents is obviously going to be number one there, but and even Middlestat as well. So do you think that by the next time we record here in the next couple of weeks that Jack Eichel is still on this roster as a Sabre, or do you think that we're here discussing, the new chapter of Sabres hockey with the captain gone and hopefully a boatload of assets coming back for the captain?
Yeah, so I'm not really sure. I mean, I would like to hope that he's traded by then. I think the first real deadline is training camp. So they still have some time because obviously you don't want Jack Eichel being around come training camp. But until Adams gets an offer, which apparently he hasn't gotten, he's not going to budge. I mean, I'm hoping by the end of this week this is resolved, just for the sake of everyone's sanity, and to kind of see what this team's shaping up to be. Like you said, we're hoping to get some assets coming back for Eichel that shape into this team's long-term future. So it is better for everyone to just end this scenario. But I also do understand Adams' point. Like, I got to do what's best for the Buffalo Sabres. So while as I'm impatient as a fan, we got to hope he doesn't screw it up. So I guess we just got to be patient. But if we're here 2 weeks from now and Jack Eichel's not traded, my tune's probably going to be a lot different. I'm going to be pretty upset because at the end of the day, I mean, each day that goes by, the situation just gets worse and worse. And obviously we don't know if his value goes up or down, but you got to assume that the closer we get to the season and he hasn't had that surgery that he supposedly needs or wants, sorry, because he needs surgery. We already know that. The agent statement said it, but Eichel wants the disc surgery. He doesn't want the fusion. If he hasn't gotten any procedure, then obviously it becomes in question, is he going to be ready for the start of the season? And I think to get the best value for Jack Eichel, the team getting him has got to be pretty sure that he's ready for the start of the season or pretty damn early in October. So for everyone's sake, the trade better be done, but I got no answer for you. I want to be hopeful and say yes, but I've said yes every time we've talked and it's never happened. So it's kind of just numb.
Yeah, he's the last guy remaining in the room, so we'll have to see if he gets his wish and is traded, and if he goes to the Western Conference, stays in the Eastern Conference, and hopefully by this time in a couple of weeks, Dahlin and Yoki Haru's contracts get taken care of, and we can kind of see what the actual real cap situation will be for the Sabres if they make any other couple of minor moves that we can discuss as well. But for today's sake, that's going to wrap it up for today's episode of the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres edition and our Sabres offseason thoughts so far. So we are your source of North American sports coverage by sports fans, for sports fans, delivered to you right here in the beautiful Niagara region. As always, I'm one of your hosts of this podcast. My name is Brandon Caputo. You can follow me on Twitter at Caputs13_AGM as well. You can follow my co-host Austin at Austin_Broad and check out his great stuff over at the Charging Buffalo, Dauber Prospects, and FC Hockey as well. And make sure if you're listening to us or watching us on the YouTube side of things, make sure you're hitting the subscribe button, smashing that like button, and hitting that bell icon for all updates on the videos that get released on our YouTube channel. So once again, this has been the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres edition on the Armchair GM Sports Network by sports fans, for sports fans. And until next time, Sabres fans, we'll talk to you guys again in a few weeks.
Talk to you in a few weeks, guys.
You're listening to the Armchair GM Sports Network.